That's it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another halaqah of Friday night, and I am here tonight with, as I promised you, presenters, students, young people from University of Toronto. We chose this topic instead of the parenting workshop, which was scheduled earlier this year, but unfortunately due to COVID, we've been delaying it, and then this opportunity opened up for many of us. So inshallah, let us open with our, as we do always, recitation from the Holy Quran, and then I will introduce our speakers and the theme tonight, which is extremely, extremely important and essential. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. صدق الله العظيم. In these verses, Allah reminds us of the balance in the world, whether on earth, in our minds, in our lives, that equilibrium is needed. And one of the most neglected aspects of health is the mental health. And unfortunately, due to the lack of experts in the field, and I would repeat, even in Canada, the number of psychiatrists per the population is very, very low, one of the lowest in the world. And then you have the psychotherapists and all of that. And parents are actually doing the therapy with whatever means they have. And then they are encountering or facing questions from their children who are struggling with different issues in a fast-paced society, changes every day. As you know, scholars have said in the last 20 years, what happened in the last 20 years is more than what happened in the last 200 years. And in the last 200 years, what happened in it with events and changes more than anything before, means since the dawn of humanity. So as a day by itself, one day is filled with challenges. And parenting has become a very difficult task. However, to give a positive note, with education, with preparedness, with workshops like this, and listening to our youth, and the youth listening to elders, we can overcome that. So tonight, I'm very pleased to have one of our members, actually, our daughter here, Yasmin, who, mashallah, she is first year, second year university, medical school in University of Toronto. Mashallah, she will introduce herself even better. And her friend, classmates, Elissa. Welcome, Elissa, to our weekly meeting here online.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I will let you do the presentation. Both Yasmin and Elissa will be able to answer questions. We're here today. I want to listen to our youth. I don't want to speak. I want to listen. So inshallah, please leave your questions. We're going to take note of all your questions and then have them drafted or written, and then you will address them later. You can see them also on the YouTube. We're on YouTube Live. So the mic is yours and the floor is yours, Yasmin. You can introduce yourselves and give us a context again. And I hope this is not the first time. It's a guide for parents by youth. It's kind of odd tagline there, but why not? We always look for advice, even from what we should listen, as I always say in my lectures and sermons. Yasmin, the floor is yours. Go ahead, you can take off your mask.
All right, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Yasmin and I'm a first year medical student. Jazakallah Imam Salimi again for inviting myself and Alyssa. And then Alyssa is also a classmate of mine. Alyssa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Alyssa, and I'm a third-year medical student at University of Toronto.
Thank you. And so as Imam Salimi mentioned, myself and Alyssa are here today to talk to you a little bit about well-being and wellness, as well as mental health in youth. And so we wanted to give this presentation not only as medical students, but as youth ourselves, as a guide, really, as Imam said, for youth. And so the title of our presentation today is What's My Child Thinking? How to talk about stress and mental health with children, a guide for parents by youth. Alyssa, if you could just. Great, all right. All right, so just to give a brief overview of our talk today. So we're going to talk a little bit more about who we are as an organization. So myself and Alyssa, thank you. And then some of the we're going to get into some of the causes of stress that you typically see in children. And then Alyssa's going to cover a little bit more about how kids show stress, and then how parents can support children through their mental health struggles. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19, the context surrounding mental health. And then we'll wrap up with some key messages. And then finally, we'll have a bit of time at the end for some questions and answers. So a little bit more about who we are. So myself and Alyssa, we are both part of an organization called the Community Health and Education for Refugees and Immigrants. So our mission overall is really to provide preventative health education and screening to newcomers in the GTA, most specifically those without health insurance. So we recognize that a lot of you on the call right now likely are insured populations. And so we've made this talk keeping that context in mind. However, that's part of our broader mission really is to provide health education and screening to that population. But really our overall vision is just to help improve the literacy and health promoting behaviors of both uninsured and the general immigrant population. So that's part of the reason why we're here to talk to you a little bit more today. So just to give some disclosures, this information is presented by medical students, not licensed medical professionals. And so we have consulted with several health professionals to ensure that our presentation provides both accurate and current information. But we would still really advise you to seek the advice of a licensed healthcare provider for information that's a little bit more specific to your child, to your family, and your personal context, just in regards to specific medical questions. And these are our acknowledgements just to thank the people who really helped make this presentation a reality and who have helped consult with us. So thank you to some of the physicians and the rest of our team at Cherry. All right, so now getting into the bulk of the talk today. So what is it exactly that kids are stressed about? So before we talk about stress specifically, I think it's really important that we actually just talk about the concept of wellness overall and the importance of wellness in Islam as well. So generally in Western medicine, we talk about this concept of mind, body, and soul. But in Islam, we have very similar concepts. So we talk about Iman, so our faith. We talk about Islam, the practice, and Ihsan, the spiritual cultivation. And those all sort of combine to form what really is spiritual wellness in Islam. And I think that highlights the importance that spiritual well-being and overall well-being is something that's not foreign to Islam. And it's not something that we should shy away from discussing. And so this is a really great infographic, and we borrow this from the muslimmentalhealth.ca website, which is a wonderful resource that I highly recommend. And we'll share those lists of resources with you at the end as well. So to talk a little bit more about mental health in children, the actual incidence of that. So according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, actually about 1 in 5 children and youth in Ontario have a mental health challenge. And about 70% of mental health challenges begin in childhood and youth, which really highlights, I think, the importance of early identification and support for children, really to help support their mental health throughout the lifespan, which sort of further impresses the need to have a healthy mind and how it's just as equally as important as a healthy body. So a lot of research has gone into certain factors that can increase your risk of developing a mental health illness or various other mental health challenges. And these things are known as risk factors. So if you were to have them, you potentially have a higher risk, or your child rather would have a higher risk of developing mental illness in their life. And so broadly speaking, we've broken these risk factors up into 3 main categories. We have factors at the individual level. So those are specific to a child. We have environmental factors. So those are things that surround a child and their local environment. And then finally, we have familial factors, so things in a child's actual family. So if we're looking at individual factors, a child who has poor overall health, so that could be other chronic conditions, is generally at a higher risk of having other mental health issues as well. Children who face bullying or other significant life changes, such as a major move, separation from one's caregiver, or serious illness or death of a close relative, especially if it's one's first encounter with death, are all considered to be risk factors. And then something that's potentially particularly relevant also to the Muslim communities, unfortunately having faced witness to violence and trauma. So including the SKC community and the sort of broader Muslim community in GTA, we have a large population of refugee and immigrants who have maybe fled violence in their country of origin. And even after being removed from those circumstances, that can still present and act as a risk factor for developing mental health challenges in children. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. Engaging in other risky behaviors like substance abuse, and then also having a lack of educational and work opportunities are considered to be risk factors. So that's something that could be really important for some of our youth who are making that transition on into university years, and especially in the context of COVID, where there isn't really a whole lot of work opportunities. That can really be a strong sense and a strong risk factor. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the environmental level risk factors. So again, these are things that will surround a child in their local environment. And we're going to touch a little bit more about discrimination specifically to Muslims. But generally speaking, experiencing forms of discrimination is a risk factor. Other environmental risk factors include multiple changes in residence. So being moved around throughout your life from city to city, not necessarily having a stable environment to grow up in. And in the absence of connection to a cultural or religious community, and as well, the circumstances around COVID-19 are certainly a risk factor. So things that we see with the restrictions and the social isolation, and I'm sure many of us are all aware, have exacerbated things in people's well-being. And then now if we're talking about family level risk factors, so separation or rejection from one's family, or parental mental or physical illness can be a risk factor. And I think the second point is really important to highlight, that your health and well-being as a caregiver is really just as important, because that ensures your ability to take care of those around you as well. And I think it's something that sometimes gets neglected, but you can only really, your child's health is really at its best if you are also healthy yourself. Another thing that we may not necessarily consider to be a risk factor that would affect the mental health of children is financial stress. And so that's something that's typically we sort of think about more in the parental realm, but it can definitely have indirect effects on the stress of children as well, because of stress that's sort of induced within the family. And then finally, again, the loss of a grandparent or other caregiver within the family can be a risk factor. So we talked a little bit about some factors that could increase your risk of developing or your child's risk of developing a mental illness. But we also know that there's some factors that are actually protective. So if you have these things, you may actually be less likely to develop some sort of mental health challenge within your lifetime. So we're going to talk about these again in the same sort of broad categories, so individual level, environmental, and family. So in an individual basis, some traits that really help and maybe promote resilience against various changes in mental health status include good self-esteem. So that's something that you can really foster as a parent in your child very early on. Children with the strong analytical and processing of information. So that can be really related to childhood development overall. And if you feel that your child may have some issues in this area, we do really recommend speaking to a healthcare professional directly. And then beyond that, just a positive school and educational experience. So that includes your interactions with both teachers, fellow students, and even guidance counselors. Beyond that, again, as we kind of touched on before, connection to one's cultural and spiritual community can act as a protective factor. Displaying empathy in appropriate social situations, having positive thinking and strong motivation, and finally, having good social skills, all can be protective against mental health issues. Then if we're talking about environmental level risk factors, having supportive friend groups can really play a big role in protecting a child from the development of mental health issues. So especially once children hopefully go back to school when things are a little bit better with COVID, they're going to be spending a significant more amount of time with their friends. And that environment can really be just as equally as important as the home environment and fostering a safe space for your child. And we touched on this already again, but a positive school environment generally, so positive school interactions with teachers and guidance counselors. And then beyond that, just general involvement in social activities, readily available access to community supports as needed, and volunteering. We know that children who volunteer are less likely to develop certain mental health issues. So I would say that whenever Imam Salimi asks people to volunteer again, I would highly recommend that your children do so because it helps. And then if we're looking at family level risk factors, having a strong sense of parental support is really key in protecting a child's well-being. And so we know that examples of positive parenting early on in youth offer significant protection. And then generally speaking, just having a connected family. So, thank you. And then just generally speaking, being well connected with one's family. That includes your siblings, your cousins, and your extended relatives and family. And then moving on to that, having a parent again who is physically and mentally well is quite important. And then lastly, having regular communication with one's family. So that again is quite important for people who are making that transition to university years or maybe moving away from home for the first time. Maintaining that sort of sense of communication and connection with your family is really important. So we talked about some risk factors. Now we want to get a little bit more into some of the common stressors that children often face. And we could probably go on about this for quite some time. There's quite a lot that could stress out children, but we've decided to sort of distill it down into 4 major categories that we feel will likely be the most representative for your child. So if we're talking maybe about first school, there's a number of things in schooling that can make your child anxious and stress them out. That can include things like peer-to-peer competition, imposter syndrome, so that's not feeling necessarily as good as your peers. And then also things, especially for university students, separation from one's parents from the first time, a pressure to succeed. So that could be both internal pressures or external pressures from a parent. It could be worries about future in your career. And again, especially with COVID, when job opportunities are limited and the future seems so uncertain. And then there's just the general things that come with school, deadlines, bad grades, sleep deprivation, exams, and so the like. And then one final point I want to touch on with school is also social anxiety and feelings of wanting to fit in with those around you, and also concerns about bullying. If we're looking at home life and some potential stressors there, we touched on some of these a little bit too, but finances can be an indirect source of stress on a child, as well as other parental anxieties. So again, really stressing the importance that your mental health and well-being does have an impact on the well-being of your child as well. Even the arrival of a new sibling can act as a stressor for a child in their home. With COVID-19, we know as well the lack of routine that many kids might be facing at home can act as another source of stress. And then other things, such as a child's growing up, maybe not feeling like they have enough space in their home, like they have outgrown their local home. And then that may lead to feelings of wanting independence. And depending on how parents feel about that, or maybe if there are disagreements about that, it can lead to other family fights. So those are all potential stressors in the home. Then if we're looking at friends and relationships with others, there are other sources of stress that we can sort of look into. And so peer pressure is a really common one, and things that can lead to other sort of more risk-taking behaviors to get that sense of wanting to fit in. There can be other tension and fights with classmates and those in their school. There can be difficulty transitioning between different relationships, for example, between friend groups as you're moving through different years of school and through different levels of education. And then a really important topic as well, and a really important stressor that's come up recently for young people is the concept of the social media identity, and being able to maintain that and necessarily feeling like you are able to compete maybe with some of your classmates online. And so that can really be a source of stress for young people. And finally, if we're looking at health stressors, that can be health issues related to the child themselves or to their family members. So if we're looking at the children who suffer from acute illnesses such as COVID-19, that may be a significant source of stress onto their mental health. Or children who also have chronic illnesses, it can lead them to having feelings of being a burden on their family. So those are all things to keep in mind. And then beyond the child themselves, health issues within the family can be very challenging. And we touched on this as well, but the loss of a loved one, especially if it's their first encounter with death, can be a major stressor on a child and their overall well-being. And when it comes to health issues, there's often this feeling of uncertainty and a loss of control, and that can really lead to a strong sense of fear in children. And then beyond just the physical health realm, when it comes to mental health, there's a lot of stigma around that. And so even bringing up discussions about that can be a source of stress for children in and of itself. So if possible, it'd be great if some of you guys can type in some stressors that you've noticed in your children's lives into the chat box, and we'll have a look at some of those. Great, so let's see. Okay, so I haven't seen any comments just yet, but if you're able to, it would be great to keep hearing those. I think we can probably move forward, Alyssa. So we talked a little bit about some of the common stressors that are faced by youth in general, but I think it's important to recognize that there are a lot of things that are unique to Muslim youth. Probably one of the biggest stressors that I think that we can all think about right now is Islamophobia. And that can take on the form of Islamophobic bullying in the schoolyard, or even beyond that, Islamophobia in our general society. Unfortunately, we've seen a significant rise in hate crimes towards the Muslim community. And that can be a real source of stress for young people, especially for our young Muslim sisters who wear hijab and are readily identifiable as Muslims. So being able to be confident and in your Muslim identity and feel safe will be quite challenging when you feel the identity of being a Muslim is really under threat. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about things that could be impacting your child's well-being as a Muslim youth. And then beyond that, there's also a significant source of stress in wanting to fit in, trying to reconcile your Muslim identity with your developing personal identity. And that can be something to keep in mind. I think it's a lot of things that young Muslims go through. And we touched on this as well, but trauma as refugees and immigrants. So again, we have a significant population of Muslim immigrants and refugees who have fled violence in their countries. And even after leaving those situations, that can act as a source of stress and a child's overall mental health and well-being. And again, the stigma around mental health, not only in the Muslim community, but in the broader community at large, even having that stigma around it, not necessarily feeling like you can talk about it, that in and of itself can be a stressor and feeling like you have nowhere to turn to. Okay, great, so I think I'll let Alyssa take over.
Okay, so the next section that we're going to talk about is how children show their stress. So before we begin, we recognize that there are many challenges that you guys as parents might face in recognizing when your child is stressed. Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate the normal ups and downs from everyday life from a more severe depressive episode. Sometimes it could just be that your child is good at hiding their feelings, or it's not really something that you talk about in your family. Sometimes, if you don't have a lot of time to spend with your child, it could be difficult to recognize these changes. And as well, it can be hard to know what signs to look out for that would indicate a decrease in mental wellness. So something to keep in mind is that every child is unique and may react to stress differently. And as well, every child may have unique coping mechanisms. So not everything that works for one child may work for another. And your children may show stress in different ways, even within the same family. Now, differences can be seen in age, ways of expressing stress, and as well as physical manifestations of stress. So if we think about the way that adults express stress, a lot of the same things are what children do. So there can be changes in thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical health. And we'll go through each of these in more detail to really try and highlight what these signs could be. So first, if we're thinking about changes in thinking, you may notice that your child has more negative thoughts than usual. So they may respond to things that usually don't stress them out in a much more negative way. There also may be changes in school performance. So for example, if your child is a straight A student, but you notice their grades are falling, this could be a sign of a decrease in mental wellness. And this can often be due to trouble with concentration, memory, and decision-making. In terms of changes in feelings, there may be more outbursts of emotion, whether it be sadness, worry, guilt, fear, irritability, or anger. This can often just be seen as being moody, but may indicate something more concerning, such as a decrease in mental health. As well, your child may feel unloved or have a low self-esteem, and these are all signs that we should really keep an eye out for. In terms of changes in behavior, you may find that your child is alone more often. So instead of doing the activities they usually enjoy or hanging out with their friends, you may find that they're just spending a lot of time at home alone. Some other things that you may notice is that they're clinging to a parent or teacher. They may be quiet or less energetic than usual. And there also may be changes in sleep or appetite, and this can both be an increase in sleep or a decrease in sleep and appetite. And as well, there may be risky or harmful behaviors that begin. So something that we like to think about is externalizing and internalizing changes in behavior. So when we think about internalizing, this is a way that children respond to stress by keeping their emotions inside. So you may notice that your child becomes more withdrawn and quiet, and this is one way that they kind of handle the stress. Now, the other way kids handle stress is externalizing ways. So this is when children bring their emotions to the outside, and they may have more misbehaving, more angry outbursts, and things like that. And now, although these two ways of handling the stress is very different, they're both very valid and real ways that children may show their stress. So something that's not often thought about are the physical changes that may accompany mental distress. So children may have these physical symptoms of sometimes just feeling sick and just a very general unwell feeling. They may also have more specific symptoms such as headache, tummy ache, neck pain, general body aches and pains. Some of the things that may be signs of stress are nausea, feeling tired, having low energy, feeling dizzy, having sleeping or eating problems, such as, or as well as bedwetting, or having too much energy, or having nervous habits such as nail biting, hair twisting, and thumb sucking. So although it's very important to investigate if there's a physical cause to any of these symptoms, it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes these symptoms may be due to mental stress. And so when we think about pain, there are many components that may go into pain, such as social, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And it might not be easy to pinpoint exactly what's causing pain because there are so many different components that go into it. We have a question for you guys again. So are there any symptoms that you were surprised are related to stress? So if you feel comfortable, type something in the chat and we'll see if Yasmin will let me know if there's any responses.
Perfect. Just keeping an eye on the chat. So nothing just yet. Maybe we'll give it a few more seconds.
Okay.
Okay, yes, go ahead, Alyssa. I think we're good.
Yeah. We'll just move on then. So section 4 is how can parents support their children when they are having some stress? So we have a little documentary here. It's a bit long for us to show today, but it's called Veil of Silence, and it just highlights what members of the Muslim community face when they're struggling with mental illness. And if you're interested in learning more and hearing their perspectives, we would really recommend that. The link is here if you would like to watch that later. So the things we're going to talk about now in this presentation are first, how to form a secure parent-child attachment. Secondly, ways to support your children through stress. Third, resources that are very helpful when dealing with mental illness and wellness and also for recognizing when it's time to see a doctor. So first, we want to talk about the secure parent-child attachment. And this is very important for the development of children. And the way you can form the secure parent-child attachment is just being present. So there's two main components to this, being both sensitive and responsive. So being sensitive means just being aware of how your child is doing. So something easy that you can do is just ask your child, how are you doing today? How are you feeling? Things like that. And then the next part is being responsive. So being able to appropriately respond to your child's needs. So for example, if your child says, oh, I'm not really feeling good today, doing things that can help cheer them up or asking more about why they're feeling that way can really show that you're listening and want to help comfort your child. So what's important to keep in mind is that the secure parent-child attachment must happen regularly. It's not something that can just be done one time and last forever. That has to be ongoing throughout the child's development. And when this parent-child attachment is secure, it forms resilience and a sense of safety for youth. Another important thing that parents can do is listen to their children. So if you really take the time to listen, you'll find that children of any age can tell you how they're feeling. So any symptom can be a real symptom. And so it's quite damaging to tell your child, oh, that's just in your head, because for your child, it could be something really real and distressing for them. It's also important to encourage your child to speak about their feelings. And you can do this by asking open-ended questions. So some examples that we have are, why do you think you feel this way? How do you think you can feel better? And what are you scared of? And just asking these questions can help open a conversation to help facilitate the dialogue with your youth. The next thing we want to talk about is fostering self-esteem in your child. So this can be done by showing love and acceptance and focusing on your child, as well as having consistent structure and rules appropriate for a child's age. So you may find that when your child is younger, there are certain rules that work, but as your child becomes a teenager and older, there might be more independence that's needed for that good self-esteem. As well, having positive reinforcement and genuine praise helps to increase self-esteem, and being a role model for your child. So this can look like taking care of your own mental health, speaking about how you feel, and taking time for things you enjoy. So when your child sees you modeling these good behaviors, it's more likely that your child will also be able to do these and have increased self-esteem. Some other things that will help are to help your child learn from mistakes, as opposed to just maybe punishing them, giving your child opportunities to contribute at home and to offer choices and chances to problem solve within the home. And all these things are things that can help foster self-esteem in your children. We also want to talk about how to create a safe and positive home environment. One thing is to be aware of your child's media use. So nowadays, most children have access to some form of technology, and most of these devices have certain settings or controls that you can use to keep track of what websites your child is using and just making sure that they're staying safe online. Another thing, what we can do to promote a positive home environment is to be sensitive when discussing serious family issues, and also to provide time for physical activity, play, and family activities. All right, so now in the setting of when your child is acutely in distress, there are some strategies that we would like to share with you. Firstly, it's important to not panic. It's good to maintain a supportive and calm environment. And this is because that children can often feed off the energies of the parents. So when the parent is very panicked and stressed, this may increase the stress of the child. Another great strategy that we can use is deep breathing and counting exercises. And one easy one to remember is called box breathing. So how it works is you can breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and hold that for 4 seconds. And when you do this a couple of times, it actually helps the body to regulate itself, and it can help calm down the child. Being reassuring also helps to calm your child, and doing something to engage your child that can help distract them from their current distress is also really helpful. So whatever your child likes to do, such as going for a walk, playing with toys, or doing arts and crafts, these are all great ways to help. Just your child just might need some space, and give them that extra space. All right, we have another chat if anyone would like to answer. It's, what are some activities you enjoy doing with your family? So you can just think about that, and maybe make a little mental note. So next time your child is stressed out, something you can try doing with your family. All right, we have a little video here actually. It's called Promoting Positive Mental Health, and we would like to share it with you now. So let's hope this works.
Promoting a child's mental health is a really key, important part of promoting their overall health and well-being. A child's mental health affects how they interact with the world, how they see themselves in the world, and ultimately also affects their physical health as well. So when caring for a child, it's important to not only nurture and look after their physical health, but also to look after their mental health as well.
You got to start with how they think about themselves. And so working on a child's mental health, and in particular, if your child is not feeling happy, or they feel a bit downtrodden, they feel not confident about themselves, or they have significant anxiety issues, they're not going to take good care of themselves. The environment, such as having people to talk to. So if you open a dialogue with your child and really encourage them to express their feelings about what they're thinking, about how they feel when something happens to them, either good or bad, they feel they can open up to you, and that provides an exceptional environment for them to develop their mental health.
The home environment is key and critical, and can involve such basic things as being a home environment where a child feels safe, where they feel loved, where they feel nurtured, where they're not exposed to violence, where they have food, healthy food, a chance to rest, a chance to play, a chance to sleep. It also involves setting limits as well, teaching your kids right from wrong, rewarding them when they do things well, but also providing consequences when they don't do things that are appropriate as well.
I think there's something to be said about sort of voicing or speaking to each other between child and parent about what their expectations are and making them realistic. So when either a parent or a child has unrealistic expectations for themselves or for each other, that can lead to stress. Every day, they're stretching themselves an extra couple hours with activities. And depending on what kind of personality they have, they may have very strong expectations like, oh, I have to perform really well at the soccer game. I hope I get first in the piano competition. And all these things can add to a lot of stress. We actually make our kids do a lot of things. And some of those things may or may not be as important to them.
I think children really respond well to routine and structure, and so having a predictable home routine with regular meals, regular snacks, regular bedtime, these are all things that really children respond well to and promote good habits and good mental health.
If you create an environment at home where you're always talking about these things, you encourage them to express themselves, then that sort of obstacle between you and your child is not there. So they feel very open with you, and that kind of environment is really, really helpful for a child.
All right, so that was a video from the Canadian Pediatric Society about promoting positive mental health, and there's lots of more resources on the website if you would like to learn more about that organization. So before we talk about getting support, we recognize that it can be quite difficult to actually reach out and get that support. So there might be fears that a diagnosis may bring shame to the child or limit their achievement, either in school, jobs, or marriage, or there could be a fear that it could lead to rejection by the community. And now there also might be fears about the mental health care available in Canada. So you might fear that the care is not culturally appropriate, or in fact, the care might not be effective. And these are all very common concerns, but I think at the end of the day, if your child needs support, these are all things that can be overcome.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. So I think I'll talk a little bit more about some of the resources that we have available for coping with distress. So there's a really wonderful website called Muslim Mental Health Canada, and they have a bunch of different resources available to you, including conferences. So those are conferences that can be available both for parents, children, as well as healthcare professionals themselves. So if there's any healthcare professionals in the audience, this is a really good hub to go to. They have a bunch of emergency resources as well, including hotlines, shelters that are available. And they also have a list of available Muslim clinicians or centers with Muslim clinicians. So that includes Muslim therapists, Muslim psychiatrists. And I think it's really important sometimes, or really helpful rather, to talk to people who may be going through similar experiences as you, or maybe who have had a similar upbringing. And that can be something to keep in mind when you're looking maybe potentially for someone for your child to speak to. And they also have a list of parenting resources available under the resources tab. So we've collected a list of these resources, and we'll hopefully be sharing them with the Imam shortly so he can disseminate those all out to you. The Canadian Muslim COVID Task Force and IGRF actually recently came out with a webinar series on building resilience and coping with anxiety, depression, and essentially just ways to promote your well-being as we're sort of entering this recovery phase of the pandemic. And so the first webinar has actually been completed, but it's still available on their website. The remaining two are for July 25th and August 22nd. So we highly recommend attending if you're looking for ways to promote well-being, both within yourself as a caregiver and in your child. So you can register for their webinar at the link at the bottom of the screen. And they also developed a really comprehensive resource guide that contains specific sections for parents as well as for children themselves. So this includes, again, hotlines, access to available clinicians, and then just general information about mental health if you have any questions about that. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of Nasiha Mental Health, and I think we actually have some posters for it here at the mosque, but it's a really excellent source of free and readily available web therapy, as well as a daily hotline. So sometimes it can be challenging for youth maybe to have these types of conversations both with their family or with just those in their inner circle. And so talking to someone who is a trained clinician and has a little bit more expertise in the subject can be really helpful. And again, these are all Muslim counselors and Muslim clinicians. And so you can reach their number at the screen there or at the website as well. And we've also included them in the list of resources that we'll be providing at the end of the talk today. Listed here as well as a number of other skill building resources, including some websites and apps to help you practice breathing relaxation exercises, mindfulness exercises, and a number of other things just to help control anxiety and feelings of nervousness, as well as other stressors in their life. We also have a list of available community resources. And so the ones that have a star next to them are actually free and readily accessible. And they also have a couple other hotlines and things that you can access through the PLO District School Board. And again, these will be included in the document that will be circulating. And again, just a couple list of informational resources. So if you have actually specific questions about mental health itself and just want to get some more information, Canadian Pediatric Society and the Canadian Mental Health Association have some really good resources, as well as the Roshni Project, which is a mental health project focused on South Asian women. So it can be especially helpful for some of the South Asian young ladies that we have watching. And the Society for Adolescent Mental Health also has some great resources available. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering at this point, you may recognize certain changes in your child, but when do you think it's maybe progressed enough to want to see a doctor? And so we'll go over that a little bit more. Essentially, if you're ever feeling any sort of worry about your child's safety, so if they're suddenly talking about suicide or harming themselves, If you notice that they're neglecting their health and their well-being, or they're speaking about hurting others or actually engaging in things like that, we'd highly encourage you to either seek out medical care in the emergency department directly, or if it's something that you feel like can wait, potentially waiting for an appointment with your family physician. But generally speaking, when it comes to matters of immediate safety, we'd really recommend that you seek out mental health and healthcare advice as soon as possible. But beyond sort of the maybe more emergent and acute things, if you notice any sort of changes in your child's coping strategies, that can also be a sign that maybe something else is going on. So if you find that your children get anxious, but they have normal strategies that they use to help them cope with that, if those strategies are no longer working and they don't really seem to be as effective for your child anymore, that could be a clue that something else is going wrong. And I think a little bit more insight into that is if you notice any changes in your child's actual function. So we use this idea of love, work, play. So if you notice changes in your child's relationships with their friends and their family, any other changes in their home environment or ways that they interact with those at home, any changes in how they are at school and their activities, that can be a sign that maybe something else is happening there. So if, say, suddenly, for example, they're struggling a little bit more in school than they normally would be, or they're falling behind, and there's someone who typically keeps on top of their work, if suddenly they're not as interested in the activities that they used to take part in, those again could all be something indicating that maybe your child is having some sort of acute issue. And then another sort of thing that may let you know that something's going on is if that symptom is, or these changes are persisting for a lot longer than normal. So that can kind of give you some insight. So some specific things to look out for in terms of symptoms include rumination. So that's the idea that your child's always bringing up the exact same worry, and it's really difficult to distract them away from that. So they're constantly focusing on this one sort of thing that's bothering them, and it's hard for them to think about anything else. And other changes that you might notice in your child include weight loss. So that can either include a complete disinterest in food, or maybe an intense preoccupation with food. So wondering how much they're eating at every time. And then beyond that, any sort of sleep disturbances. So that could include sleeping too much or sleeping too little. And then any other concerns that you may have about your child's development. So their social interaction with others, if you feel that they're on par, and if they're in keeping with the child for their age. So what we really want to impress, though, however, is that at the end of the day, you know your child best. And if you have any concerns or uncertainty about your child's mental health and well-being, it's never a wrong answer to go out and seek medical professional help. Again, you kind of know what your child's normal is. And if you notice any deviations or changes from that normal, especially if they're prolonged, it's a good time to maybe go and chat with someone. And that can even involve a discussion with your family physician, even just an appointment on your own, and maybe talking a little bit about how you can bring up these conversations with your child and how to best go about handling something like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID-19 in the context of mental health and well-being. And so how exactly do we talk to children about COVID? And I'm sure many of you have already had many discussions with your children about COVID over the past year, considering how much of an influence it's played in our lives. But I think it's important for us to talk about it nonetheless. So according to Stats Canada, about 64% of youth aged 15 to 24 have reported a negative impact on their mental health and well-being as a result of COVID. And what we know is that post-secondary students, so kids who are going off to university, they're actually the most affected by this. And so throughout the pandemic, we've had different sources of stress that could have been from the social isolation that we're feeling to the various restrictions. But now as the pandemic is nearing its final days, there may be some new worries about social anxiety after year-long social isolation. So how do we interact and reintegrate with people after we've been avoiding them for nearly a year and a half? There could be worries about finding your new normal and what that looks like. So what will the future for children look like? What is school going to look like? That can be a source of stress. And then it could be other worries about reconnecting with old friends and forming new ones, concerns about getting the vaccine or not. And as we have new variants, there's still the continued fear of illness and the impact on both the child themselves and their loved ones. And finally, we know that COVID-19 has been a very trying year for a lot of families in terms of finances. And unfortunately, the situation for a lot of families hasn't changed. So that continued financial stress continues to impact a lot of people and can be a source of stress for youth. So in terms of how you actually bring up conversations about COVID-19 to children, again, I'm sure many of you guys have already been well versed in this over the past year, but a general approach we sort of recommend is asking, answering, checking in, emphasizing, and reassuring. So asking open-ended questions and letting your child really guide the discussion. So something like, a lot has been changing with the pandemic recently, and the news can be really overwhelming. And asking, what have you heard about it? So keeping the discussion open, letting them guide that forward. And in terms of answering your children's specific questions, we really recommend keeping your message simple, straightforward, with easy to understand language. And oftentimes that can take a little bit of research on your part, which we recognize can be challenging, especially as information keeps changing, but something to keep in mind. And then checking in with your children to see how's this making you feel. Again, keeping it open and letting your children discuss and sort of guide the conversation to how their emotions are. And then finally emphasizing as well what you as a family are doing to protect your child, like getting your vaccines, continuing to wear a mask, and washing your hands often. And then just reassuring your child that it's okay to be worried, but there are a lot of amazing people who are continuing to work to keep us safe and healthy. And that if we all do our part, we'll continue to be on our way to recovery. So again, we can sort of talk about COVID-19 in different ways to both young and older children. And for young children, even though, again, we've been through this for about a year and a half or so, there can still be a lot of questions about COVID-19 itself, and it's still a very sort of abstract concept to them. So talking about it to young children kind of take a what, who, and how approach. So what is COVID-19? It's a tiny germ that can make people sick, and people who get sick may have a cough, a sore throat, or a fever, or all of those things together. And then who can get sick? Well, we know anyone can get sick from COVID-19, especially older people, but while fewer kids get sick from COVID-19, we do know that it does happen, especially with some of the new and emerging variants, which is why it's important to impress on kids the importance of maintaining appropriate hygiene techniques that we were doing for the past year, but not to scare them about it either. And then how people can get COVID-19 when the germ is on their hands and they touch their mouth, nose, or eyes. And that's, again, why it's important for us to keep up our hygiene techniques, washing our hands often. People can also get it if someone coughs or sneezes close by, and so that's why we wear masks. And again, this is really important to impress on children who may not yet be eligible for their vaccines. Now we're having these conversations with older children and teens. They may have a stronger sort of concept of what COVID-19 is, and maybe a little less abstract to them. And so some of those conversations may be a little bit more around their actual fears and worries. So acknowledging and listening to those worries and their anxieties and frustrations. And those can take the form of fears about their future, about their careers, friends, anxieties about going back to school and meeting people again. So those are all things to acknowledge and listen out for. And for your teenagers, really encouraging and emphasizing continued physical distancing, mask wearing, frequent hand washing. And for all of your children who are 12 and up, we recommend continuing your vaccinations as well. So in terms of supporting mental health and wellness during COVID-19, while things are finally, alhamdulillah, opening up and we're hopefully slowly getting back into the swing of things, there's still some time that we are going to be inside for a bit longer. And so continuing to limit TV and social media exposure while maintaining a strong sense of routine. So regular wake and bedtimes are highly encouraged. Scheduling in family time and family activities, especially in these warmer months, is a really great idea to limit some of that sort of TV and social media time and just really engage the family in overall wellness together. Promoting a healthy diet and exercise, and again, a sleep schedule within your family. And for some of your family who are maybe a little bit more at risk still, our family who's a little further away, maintaining those virtual connections that even if we do have to socially distance for a bit longer, we're not, or rather, while we're physically distancing, we don't have to necessarily be socially apart. So.
All right, so the next part, we would like to touch on some frequently asked questions about COVID-19. So our first question is it safe for my child to go to day camps? So now just talking in the Ontario context, we are currently in the stage 2 of reopening, which does allow day camps and overnight camps. However, it's really important for each family to weigh the risk and benefits of attending these types of camps, especially if there are, for example, more vulnerable people within your family, or some people in your family haven't been vaccinated. It would be good to talk to a healthcare professional to really get information that's specific to your family. Next question is, should my child get vaccinated? And so in Canada now, the vaccinations are approved for children ages 12 and over, and generally it is recommended for children to get vaccinated. But again, if you have any specific concerns, or if your child has any specific healthcare conditions that might impact this, it would be really important to talk to your healthcare professional about this. And the next question we have is, how do I tell my teenager to physically distance? Should they be allowed to see their friends? And to answer this question, we would like to look at the current guidelines for Canada that have been released. So depending on whether you have 2 vaccinations or one or no vaccinations, the current guidelines are a little bit different. So you can see on the most right-hand column are the current recommendations for those who are fully vaccinated. And then in the middle column are the recommendations for those who have 1 or 0 vaccinations. So you can see that there are less restrictions when you are spending time with fully vaccinated individuals. However, when you don't know the status of those who you're hanging out with, you should still consider wearing a mask and physical distancing. And something else it's important to note is that you should wait 2 weeks after getting your vaccine to give your body's immune system the time to build up that response before hanging out with your peers. And here are just some more guidelines. So just highlighting that when the people that you are hanging out with are unvaccinated or partially vaccinated, and there's people from multiple households, it's important to put more of these precautions in place, such as wearing a mask, physical distancing, and only attending events where you think that there's good safety plans being followed. So with that, we would just like to finish off with our key messages. So first, children of any age can articulate their feelings in their own way. So it's really important as parents to listen to them and give them the time to express their feelings. Second, any symptom is a valid symptom. As we heard previously in talk, there can be both changes in behavior, thoughts, feelings, physical symptoms.
You see them on YouTube?
We'll answer this.
And thirdly, the children can appreciate open dialogue and a listening ear. And lastly, don't hesitate to seek healthcare advice if you're ever uncertain or concerned. And with that, we would just like to say thank you for listening to our presentation, and we would like to open it up to answer any questions at this point.
Sorry about that, Alyssa. I think felt a little bit mixed up. But yes, we have a couple of great questions that are coming in. So one really good question that we have is, can you please advise some ways for kids to feel more free to talk to their parents, so not scared about these kind of things? Do you want to take that, Alyssa, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can start off and we can both.
Okay, perfect.
So I think some of the things that we mentioned that we can expand upon is first being a good role model. So if your child sees that the parents are openly talking about their feelings and supporting each other, this can give a signal that for your child that it is safe and good to talk about your feelings. Another thing that we touched upon is positive reinforcement. So for example, if your child ever does approach you with any concerns that are happening in their life, instead of like brushing them off, saying I'm too busy, or even making fun of their concerns, it's really important to offer that positive reinforcement. So for example, this can be like saying, thank you for sharing this with me. I really appreciate when you do this. What are some ways that we can make this better? Things like that. So when they have these positive experiences with sharing their feelings, they're more likely to continue to do it in the future.
Yeah, no, and I think I would just reiterate the same sort of things, like keeping an open mind and a safe space for your child. And then as a child, if you're a little bit nervous about coming to your parent themselves, I think just approaching it again in an open way. And I think reiterating that your mental health is equally as important as your physical health. So if you're worried about talking to your parents about that and actually bringing up the discussion, I think that's a good way to start it. And if it's specific to the Muslim community, I think highlighting that In Islam, we actually don't shy away from talks about mental health and well-being, and that's a very important part of our spirituality as well. So I think bringing up those things with your parents can be helpful. So I hope that helps. So another question for us, Alyssa, what are your thoughts on children preferring to spend their time online gaming at the expense of spending quality time with their family? What do you think about that?
I think, I guess each child has their own preferences, but I think as a family, it's important to support other means of having fun. So maybe if there's anything else that your child likes to do, such as like going for walks, playing games with their family, carving out that time within your schedule as a whole family to do these things might encourage them to spend some extra time doing other things, and even engaging their friends in other activities might be helpful.
Yeah, great. And I would probably agree with the same thing as Alyssa, is that having almost making like family time as part of your daily routine. So scheduling that in, so it's a part of your day that your child expects to have, and that's sort of regulated. We do recommend sort of limiting the exposure to like online gaming stuff to maybe just about like less than an hour or so a day, and that generally speaking, that limiting sort of social media and that the like is probably better, especially when it comes to wanting to spend time with family. And so, like Alyssa said, I think just scheduling that in and reiterating the importance of that, and finding what everyone in the family enjoys actually doing, I think is also really important. So that you guys can actually do things that you guys all like, and something that your children look forward to as well. So let's see, any other questions? What are the most common mental health issues pre-COVID and during COVID? So I would say maybe if I can answer that one, I can start off with answering that one a little bit. It's hard to say if they're really different, but I think maybe sometimes COVID exacerbated people's mental health issues to begin with. And I think that the social isolation was a really big part of it. I think as humans, we're social beings, and not being able to be around one another can be very anxiety inducing. It can cause a lot of distress, especially for young children. I think we're learning how to form those relationships to begin with. So I think that's probably a really big difference in some of the mental health issues that we're seeing, is the really pronounced amount of social isolation. And I think just really the quantity, like the actual volume of mental health, and probably the prevalence that you're seeing now post-COVID. Alyssa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. I think we know that some of the most common mental health conditions that youth face are like things like anxiety and depression. And definitely, as Yasmin was saying, being isolated and having these stressors in life can really exacerbate these. And something I think that we can consider as we go out of COVID is perhaps like more things like social anxiety, as we try and reintegrate into like our social lives once again. That can be something that might be challenging for youth and might come up as well.
All right, thanks, Alyssa. So we have another question. So how do doctors treat mental illness in children? So I can get started with that one. So sometimes we have various psychotherapies or behavioral strategies that are implemented for children, different classroom strategies that some support workers at school can help implement. And family support is also just really important. So it's not a sort of a one strategy, but it's more of a holistic thing and different things that you incorporate. And in other cases, children may also need medications to help support their mental health and well-being. And if medicine is prescribed, the child should be watched and evaluated regularly. Alyssa, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that too.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you've said. I think it's important to recognize also that every child, even if they have the same diagnosis as one of your friends or a family member, the treatment they need might be different, and what works for them might be different. So I guess it's important to be patient when trying different treatment options, and to really give it the time to see if it works, and then be open to changing things if they don't work.
Great. So I'm just taking a look right now. I don't see any questions just yet, but we can maybe just hang around to see if any other questions come up in the meantime.
There is a question.
Mhm.
I sent it to you.
We answered that one.
Huh?
We answered that one, the COVID.
Yeah, written.
Yeah, for one, we answered. I think there might be
Questions.
of course.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum again. I am back. Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation for Elissa and Yasmin. And we're very glad to have you. A lot of people will watch, so they're watching also on other places. So we'll diffuse it on other Facebook and others. But you saw the questions on.
Yes.
One more question just came in now. What are the most affected communities, given the social, factor there, in your experience, your survey? Is it the Muslim community, Chinese community, Black community, indigenous community? When it comes to, parents and children, does the economical factor plays a big role? Parents who are busy working, children raised by or attended by the babysitter versus not only children, also teenagers. Have you seen any difference, or it's the trend everywhere?
So generally speaking, when it comes to research, so when we look at things, we call them social determinants of health. So
Yeah.
these are things that are sort of social factors around children's life. So if a child faces poverty, if they may be separated from their parents, that also being racialized. So being of a specific race can impact your overall mental health and well-being. So that can affect your health, your physical health, but also your mental health as well. And so generally speaking, most marginalized communities in our society are most affected by mental health. And these identities often combine. So it can include your religious identities and your racial identities. So oftentimes our Black brothers and sisters and our Indigenous brothers and sisters really suffer from some of the worst because of the sort of systemic racism that we have and the poverty that those communities often face. And so generally speaking, when we talk about issues like that, we bring up this idea of social determinants of health and how the environment that we make for children around also really impacts that. Alyssa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was actually just looking up one study published in 2016, and they showed that in Ontario, Chinese and South Asian patients experience the most severe mental illnesses at the time of hospital admission compared to other patients. But something that's also very important to consider when we think about this is lots of patients that have severe mental illnesses might not show up at the hospital and might have even worse outcomes. So one thing that comes to mind is the Indigenous communities in Canada have some of the highest rates of drug abuse and suicide in all of Canada and even like in the world, but they might not have access to the healthcare readily. So that's why perhaps this is not reflected in that statistic. But yeah, I agree with all that you said too.
Okay, thanks so much, Alyssa.
Yeah, you have any question?
Any questions from you?
Yeah, I have some youth here.
Mhm.
Maybe some of from your friends, issues that they have, they want to talk to their parents, but they find it difficult. Do you have any question about that like that? No? It's from your friends or anybody, the difficulty, any obstacles? So yeah, there's the issue of religion, taboo issues. We won't touch on that, but there is a very critical issue in some societies. Girls don't speak up, whereas boys can speak in some societies, especially Eastern cultures. The girls are more closed. So what are the ways? I mean, the mother, definitely the parents are always fair when they deal with their children, but would you recommend that the mother is the best to talk to her daughter and the father is the best to talk to his son, or that's really irrelevant? The cultural components, studies have shown the cultural components plays a big role, the upbringing, how they were reared and how they were allowed to ask questions or not. So the cultural factor is extremely critical, and we noticed the difference between Eastern culture and Western cultures. There is this, you can talk to the parents, you can even look into their eyes. That might be hindrance. Then they come here, they're liberated by their teachers. The teachers say you can ask any question. So there is this dichotomy at school, and I want the parents, Muslim parents, to know at school, they tell them we are empowering you. Ask anything that comes to your mind. At home, you can't ask everything you want because you have many limitations. So how can we strike the balance, in your survey and study of this subject here? And how can we overcome this cultural component keep the positive aspects of the respect and, language. But at the same time, you find that the school teachers say that the kids don't respect. So you see here, respect is missing here. So you can say whatever you want. At home, there is respect, but you can't say whatever you want. So the parents would never know what the children are thinking.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's really important, I think as a parent, is to make sure that by keeping open communication and letting your child speak to you and have these questions, that you don't punish them for being curious. And I think that probably the best person for your child to approach these questions with is you. And I think ultimately you would like them to be able to come to you for those things. So I think keeping an open mind and leaving a safe space for dialogue with your children. I recognize that sometimes, especially with the sort of cultural component, it can be challenging in that there is a lot of stigma, especially when asking questions when it comes to mental health. But I think reiterating the fact that mental health is just an extension of physical health and it's much in the same thing. And so I think it's about knowing how to appropriately ask those questions and in the right context as well. But ultimately, I think if you as a parent make that environment safe for your child, to know that they can be the first point that they go to when it comes to issues of mental health. And whether it's your mother or father, I think ultimately, whoever the child feels most comfortable and approaches first, I think should be the one to really initiate that conversation, because there's likely a reason that child chose either your parent or your mother first to approach about that. And I think it's kind of takes a little bit of responsibility on the parents' part to keep that conversation open. And I think to not be immediately reactive as well. I think sometimes when we hear some of these questions, our gut instinct is to react and feel almost a little bit frightened by the kind of questions. And there's a lot of frightening things out there for children as well. But keeping a calm demeanor for your child.
But there is stress. Stress is a mental health issue. Okay. Stress is part of mental health. Is it that you could say that's the threshold of mental health? Stress. We all have a piece of stress. Our life is stressful. The children have a stressful life. Kids are stressed. But why are they stressed? They don't know what they're stressed about. An adult might be able to diagnose and tell you job, future of children, finances. A child doesn't know. Okay. And the discussion of the parents, depending on their education and understanding and the things you mentioned, they would be able to trigger the child to speak in the right direction and reveal what they are hiding. Give you an example, addiction. A lot of parents don't want to, it's a no, but the child is already addicted. So let's deal with it. So instead of getting the kids out of this addiction, we're just into the blaming, why did you go to drugs? Well, he's already there now. It's a fact. The child is addicted. So the approach is not to talk to the child about drugs. The problem first, get the child out of addiction. And those tools, unfortunately, nobody is born knowing them. Even psychotherapists are having trouble, counseling children. Why can we expect the parents to handle them? You have two questions.
Yes,
there.
perfect. So, next question is, what advice would you give to youngsters who have issues to lay down their priorities? I'm not too sure what they mean by that. Have issues to lay down their priorities.
So, which question? By Muhammad Rida?
No, 501. I think we answered
Okay.
that one.
What advice would you give the youngsters who have issues to lay down their priorities? Oh, he means to set
goals.
Setting their priorities.
I think generally speaking, I think modeling by example as well. I think children, I think that's a big part of children's development as well, is that we model behaviors of our elders as well. And so I think modeling what good behaviors and what priorities should look like as well can really help with that. And again, creating a positive, supportive environment where you also help motivate your child can really help in helping your child find their own personal priorities and their preferences. Alyssa, I don't know if you had anything that you want to add to that about helping children sort of, I think what they're asking maybe is like how to help children find their sort of ambitions and their own goals.
Because let Alyssa talk.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Alyssa. You want to add anything?
Yeah, so finding like their priorities in life, I think. One thing is often like youth are kind of lost and they don't necessarily know what way to take the direction. And sometimes offering support, having your own like advice from your own experiences, or connecting them to people like maybe a guidance counselor or other older mentors within the community that they can look up to, kind of get more information that way. And I think another thing to consider is that sometimes it can be hard to know which priorities are right. I think if your child's priorities differ from what you want their child's priorities to be, that can be perceived as wrong or not having the right priorities. But I think having the respect and support is important to consider, and trying to work out these differences.
Yeah. Well, the issue from our perspective, from at least Muslim community, the children learn the priorities from their parents. Okay, so family is a priority, health is a priority, well-being is a priority. Then with the difference of opinion comes on issues outside the family. What's your opinion regarding vis-a-vis so-and-so, a social phenomenon? That's where differences come. The schism doesn't happen if in a family where the children are raised on values and principles. That's not the cause of problems. The cause is when they go to university or high school and they're exposed to new ideas, they come and discuss. Example, in our Muslim community, issues related to evolution, Darwinism, issues of creation, issues of God and religious ideas. That's where the clash happens. And then they come and say, well, our priority is God, but why do I make him my priority? In our studies, in our observation over the years, the environment impacts the child. However, you do have odd cases. You have once in a while rebellious children. That rebellion is not a bad thing. It might show leadership, actually. So should not, I always say to the parents, don't fight it. A child who questions is not a bad idea. He's a leader. We just had this discussion on Friday, and we're talking about children who are coming, they're questioning principles because they understand that they are why they are set as principles. And this is question by priority is very important. I don't expect a 14, 13 years old child, although in our opinion, they have reached the age of discerning, but in general, you need to reach the age of majority or maturity to be able to set your priorities. But the methodology, which you mentioned earlier, knowing and being empowered of the tools and who to turn to, is a sign that they will be able to choose the friend from the food, and this is issue of trust. We teach our little girls, be careful, our boys, be careful, don't go with strangers and this. But something happens, and this is very important, why your workshop is key, is, and I'm sure you touched on it, but you didn't get, is trauma. What you do with a child who's traumatized. Okay, this is very dangerous for the mother and the father. Parents say, my child is traumatized and doesn't want to tell us. This happens in every home. Could be something you may think is trivial, but it traumatized that girl in high school. Maybe a boy talked to her, said, you're ugly. And she would never tell her parents because she expects the boy to say, you're beautiful. We had these cases. So she locks herself, she doesn't want, and she loses confidence. You'll be surprised that girls 14, 15, 16 years old, a small statement like that, or even boys of like that, somebody tells a boy, you're a loser, you can't even shoot a ball. Those little comments could destroy the confidence of a child. And then the parents don't know what's wrong with the child. And then the children, they don't want to say that we interacted with friends. This is key. How would you handle that if you don't know about it and the child doesn't want to talk? So you go back to the point both of you mentioned is, do you have a foundation of trust between you and your child? Before you solve their problems, you need to have solid bridge. They can trust you with everything. That's why mother-daughter, she tells her everything. Never, and she doesn't tell the father. She should tell if it's major threatening. But there are things, somebody told the girl, you're ugly. It happens a lot every day. And girls pay attention, especially between the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, teenage, the looks. She starts she's aware now of makeup and how she wants to be beautiful. She wants to be told you're beautiful. That increases her confidence. But if it comes negative and let's say she likes a boy, nothing wrong, nothing haram. But then he says, oh, you're ugly. Some of the boys are really mean. They behave like babies. And then that would destroy. So the mother doesn't know what's wrong with the girl until the girl becomes 24, then these are issues. Parents will only come around that issue if the children trust them.
Yeah, and exactly. I think that it stresses the importance of positive parenting and building that relationship, like you said, that bridge from the beginning. Is there another question there? Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so how do we make kids follow set routine during summertime when it's easy for them to watch screen time for long periods? So that can be really challenging, especially if you work full time during the day. And so we'd really one potential trick that you can recommend is trying to set a routine on a weekend when you're actually there. So helping to get that as part of your child's routine. So again, having some sort of strict or maybe progressing towards stricter bedtimes and rising times, just to get them into sort of general schedule. A good way to sort of monitor and help with screen time is actually to have, I think on certain devices, you can actually lock screen time. So you can maybe set it for an hour. And we recommend like more than an hour probably isn't great for your child anyway. So to implement some of those things to begin with would be helpful. But yeah, I think using the time that you have with your children to set up a strong routine helps, like such as normal wake and bedtimes. Alyssa, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that too.
Sure. I think something else to consider is that when you give your child choice, they're more likely to follow through with it. So maybe when you're setting that schedule, having your child involved in what you're doing for the day might help them to be more excited and want to follow a routine. And sometimes also, especially for younger children, if there's some type of reward system, for example, if you follow this routine all week, then on the weekend, your family goes out and does something they enjoy, that can help kind of have that motivation for your child to go through with the routine too.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think that's the last question we'll take. I think we'll just wrap up. But Jazakallah, Imam Simi, for letting us speak today.
Yeah, oh no, this is anytime. Thank you very much. I'm just moving.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for Leo and Elissa and Yasmin. Thank you for being. I know it's summer and the video is going to be live so people can go and watch it. There are a lot of weddings, including a big one happening right here and the community, but it's a very good resource and people can watch with the presentation. Brothers and sisters, I know many of you are registered for this workshop. Of course, we would like you to share this video with parents. It's a good resource. We've tackled a lot of issues. This presentation is really heavy duty. It needs digestion. So it needs, as they say, need the revision. And what you should do eventually is watch it, discuss it with your children. There are a lot of resources here. But it goes back to three things, all what we discussed today. Number one, very important, communication. We say in business, location. When it comes to family, we always say communication. Allah has given us two ears and one mouth, so we can listen more. When you have this urge just to talk, not listen, you can never establish any relationship, including with your children. When children know that you have lent their ears, they'll trust you and come and tell you every single thing. And that's why I would strongly recommend either at breakfast time, and I would recommend breakfast time in winter, but dinner time or once a week, family supper, twice a week, discuss what did you learn in school, is everything is okay. That's every time. When they feel it's important, they will report to you. Most of the children will come. Now with COVID, it's a little bit exceptional. Number two is we said communication. The second one is trust. We must establish trust, and trust doesn't happen like that. It's by experience. When they know they can talk to you as a parent, and you would agree with me, and you alluded to it earlier, trust is very important. Trust is when you know that these people will handle your affair as if it's theirs. And children, when they know their parents care for them and they understand. Of course, you have spells here and there where they don't want to talk to nobody. That's normal human nature, especially during the teenage. They're evolving, and we are biochemical beings, And number three, which is very important, which is very basic in every relation, is respect. Once you respect their feelings, you respect that they have an opinion. Don't shut them down. Oh, you stupid, you don't know. That is not a good way to talk to a child. Every time, you stupid, you don't know. You stupid, you donkey. In some of the cultures, they call their children donkey. Unfortunately, donkey or mule, stubborn. Those things are bad. people use animals. And I'm talking maybe not in the Western culture, but Eastern cultures, they do. Don't ridicule a child. Don't break them. You don't, if you want them to listen to you, obey you, they don't have to submit. Submission is not the way to make someone obey. It is love and respect that makes us obey. Even with God, the relationship with God, we are submitting to him the concept of Islam because we love him. You're willing to do for your loved one, you're willing to do anything. If someone loves someone, he's willing to do anything she wants because he loves her. And he knows she wouldn't ask something. Allah Almighty never asks us something that would harm us or bad or harm others. So similarly, as a father, when they love you, they will listen to you. But that love will not happen unless you show them that you care or respect. Because respect is the translation of love. It could be in body language. It could be the way we talk to them, the way we put our hands over their shoulders. Michael Jordan said once, and a beautiful thing to Michael Jordan and all these celebrities, he said, what motivated me the most is my father's presence when I was playing basketball. He would be in every game, and when he couldn't, he would excuse himself and ask him and apologize. He couldn't make it, and he was my primary coach, not the coach. So that respect is very important. So again, trust, respect, and communication, they are key to establish, to allow the children to talk to their parents. Thank you very much again for Yasmin, and we wish you all the best. May God bless you. You are frontline workers very soon, and you're doing this because you care. You also, again, we remind you to go get vaccinated, and you're also, this is our group. I did actually a video, and I did shots for them when I took my vaccine. Please get vaccinated. It's going to be serious, this Delta. We're hearing even there might be third shot for the people who took Pfizer, Allah knows. But please take your vaccine, and inshallah, everything will be fine. Let's keep if we're optimistic, the children will be optimistic. If we're pessimistic and doom and gloom at home, the kids will be doom and gloom and will even increase depression. So we are the contributors to our children's welfare. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. And no announcement. What's the other announcement? We will make announcement, inshallah. More, you'll see them on the online. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Leo, Elisa. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.